Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. And a huge thank you and Tashidele to Rinpoche for being with us and offering these incredible teachings, profound teachings on Tsongkhapa's in praise of dependent origination, of course. And it was a long time ago now since our last session, but I believe we got to verse 5. So looking forward to continuing with the text. And a huge thank you as well to Geshe Rongmo for being our translator today. So we're double blessed. So without further ado, I'd suggest we're going to offer a short mandala and say the refuge and bodhicitta verse in preparation for the teaching. And then I will hand straight over to Rinpoche to get us started. Osa Jepeki Juxing Meito Chamri Ralingjin Nidegen Pali Sangye Yokunam Dayena Chepasho Yedangu Adnamandala Kamnuyatayami Ange Jodan Soke Chonamla Janje Bade Dane Kapse Chi Dage Chonyan Gipe Sonam Ki Jola Penchi Sange Jupar Sho Sange Jodan Soke Chonamla Janje Bade Dane Kapse Chi Dage Chonyan Gipe Sonam Ki Rola penchir sange jupar sho sange jodan soge jonamla janje bade dagne gyapsu chi dage chonyan gipe sonamge Rola penchir sange jupar sho.
Namo la yake da nuda nene ke jumbo da la mi ke na lo kunje dana ji zang da tanje ke do da ge chu de do do wa ji ji jo an zra ti ni jan ju na ji re do da ju na ju shi ni ge chen ni shi ni shi da de to ke bien ba ya to sho si chi ne ji da du ni ka da de je no do wa yi ge re no se do shi 다 다른 송디 니마 가시시린 비 니마 시유서 에 디린라 딘디 되베 엔디시 자야리 더 딘디 되베디 지당다 지 중가부 지 중가부 친비 성제 중딘데라 되베 다雄起 차디고를对位雄起那对位雄起상제 중딘 대지 연딘 주비군이 상제로对位雄起 차기 요르디对추디 강기군이对位 연디 강기군이对吧당 양면의 된다 간대지 군이 상제 중딘 대라 对吧 디이 토니 단용디 강라 딘디 对吧的 하장기雄 가르쳐 보다 된다 딩서부 지 투모 많이 뭐 시우지 차디 요소래 지 당기 당아랑 후기지 되라 돈 쇼로 대버 유행기 봄에 당기 라마도 되라 돈다 쇼로 다 되라 돈다 담만더와 꾸로 되버 유축으로 송로 되버 유축으로 다나 신기 진 제버 친내 된데로 되버 용축으로 되당 되당 면다 와다 나 수가지 용거로 디 낭니 딘지 되바 슬라윤디 강라 상제 중딘 대지 딘지 세치 송샤 딘지 대원 용거 세치 송샤스 다디 딘지 대원 용바 용어 디 송바 디 디군에 다 딘지 송도 세정 상제 중딘데 할레버 지레샤 시지니 딘지 대원 용어 송바 디다 송어 송라노 메버지 记了，记音不记，送起今年第一个呢对过的是吧？现在今天给的对外兄弟跟这些的学员人，那你的学儿结巴了，爱了的，那鸡蛋你进不对吧？顶这把不对，鸡总个不进不下的过了。他鸡总个不进不去，当公路现在人是不给学那么多，他公路出去人心没有的，人送人心起码都需要嘛的。 아니 공도 춘종원에 공도 다 춘종원에 로송싱아 도안에다 쉬려야 쉬다 쉬요래 쉬니 아니 안도랑라 로존나 샤총견발라 로존나 도시 아니 공도 주로了预了呀 폐시预藏了 폐시시네 나预藏了 러버라니도 순낭치시네 도시 다 지당 나조 남준 pepa tsukin dinde si yue wa kaso warta mi juma juma chachang juma se chira mi zang ya juma ji ma do jirmu ji mi zang di jebi juba sunra si ke ma re penbu chimbu shi dinde juba yinbe ke se ke mi do ani ya jirmu ji kaso re lama zhuye gu yang si ji che ji ne gu gu ma di da ni ga chimbu ni da dinde ke cha yo ma re 그러나 미상 주마치기 아니 잡아 주마 춘주 지당기 잡아 주마지랑 라라버네 러니낭치 러존낭치 그 세페용 나 페바로 아디 페지지니 공기베 가리 넘버 이내지 투모 많이 봐 민다오 쉬게 되지 러좀 쉬고 쉬게 되지 러존낭 낭당의 때문에 이나지 아니지 구마시당의 때문에 이나지 양치 가추든데 숨베 이나지 숑든데 장베 이나지 근데 아마 신기 갈래 공부 냥이 지지니 근데 라 냥이 나당의 때문에 이나지 상지 미셔지 쉬우지 할래지 페어다 다 제보로 공차디
No sé. Now Rinpoche said, well, for a few times, we got together here 3-4 times, we'll meet together here for a few days teaching, or the teaching being on the praise to dependent origination. So Rinpoche will teach this particular text for these few days. And this particular text was composed by Lama Tsongkhapa. It's a text, as you know, it's a praise to dependent origination. Here, it's therefore part of the categories of texts that are praises from a disciple who expresses praise towards their Lama. And usually when you have these kind of texts, in the case of these kind of texts, well, certain qualities are expressed. You talk about, for instance, their body, their speech, their activities, and so on. So in this case, the text praise to dependent origination, this kind of text is considered to be extremely profound, quite unusual in that which is being praised, because what is being praised is not just the body or the speech of the Buddha, but something very particular. What is being praised here is the fact that the Buddha taught dependent arising or dependent origination. So that's why the Buddha, according to like Lama Tsongkhapa seeing himself as a disciple of the Buddha, saying the Buddha is so amazing because of what he taught. And that being dependent origination, this is what's going to be explained here as part of this praise. Now, Lama Tsongkhapa, talking about the author himself, he passed away when he was still relatively young. He was only 63 or 64 years old. However, he started practicing, or he started to at least study the Dharma when he was very young. He was only 3 or 4 years old when he started to study the Dharma. So in his monastery in Amdos, he started there, and from there he went to central Tibet, and what else is really unusual, or what is noteworthy about him, that he manifested as just an ordinary person. He was not some kind of special being. He didn't manifest in that way. For instance, his family was not a family with a high status. They were just ordinary. His parents were totally ordinary. And he himself didn't manifest as a reincarnation of a special master from the past. So he basically was just this ordinary man who studied the Dharma, and taught the Dharma and so forth. But the way he manifested in this life, although as an ordinary person initially, was extremely special. Like the way he studied the Dharma, the way he taught it, the way he wrote about it, the way he practiced. So all this was really special when looking at his life.
다 딘디 되바디 만상배 뇌들라 지단이 친구 다 표현한 단다 공양이 지가 샤델을 펴바로 리트를 펴바로 유가 추능세 유가를 펴바 유가를 펴네 니쿠페 가수고래 사장 초사야 당다 아또 디디 종양이 제도 사용 할레베다 슈칭 지체어다 깔레 시부지 정도 저 통동 지나로라 샴봉 송주 수주래 같이 채버래 아니 다나신게 민jem 봉 송주 수주 이나 되네 퓨 아니 머리지 베지 공량이 나야다 디주제디 고랑기 나타나 송단 딜라가 순제 용디가라 지단기 미지 제도에 순제 짐도다디 깔레 시부지 정도 다깔레 딘데 지자자자지네 단다디 넘버 상지베다 상지 중딩데 이 송기 나로라 깔레 카슈디 디스고레 상지 중딩데 코랑이네 디송도가 디지털 취시 쿠이 니 술라 된장 고르미니베스 아니 왜 취사무 디지털바시베 할레베 가서 올다 디지세디 통바이나 나랑 속이 네 나사당 치 바시데 베 창월로 바세 퇴시로 미시베 몽바도 마소나 딘데시 퇴기 디지세디 딘데히베 치미 처음에 베시 디지 사바미 비시기 디지세 딘데 송부도 하셔서 딘데히베 디지털비 취지 그런 게 니디스 다 딘데시로 구조로 레디 술라 딘네 우만도스다 고사마리 세상 취시발라 취시에기 상루디 상제이다现在平度用啥嘛的上上딘데 토로 공부 중발해스 그래서 상제 중딘데 이나야 딘중기 디쿠나니 세 딘진데 원중이 로 동반이 내루 디쿠나니 세 다음에 비 취취디 할레비 또 가고 있는 송구도 세상 딘데이다 상제기 송르 시 남대 주제문이 시에 있나다 사회는 사바 차이는 차워디 동반이 내루디 차디고 그래서 디다 야부지定了跑腿啊，当亚波级的系统的制度，公主娘的休息，老兄休息别，还来别老兄家庭不能，俺第三级如果马上不接近呢，一旦你去没得，下来了偏心别，就说你在西行那边，干来讲你都休息呢，干来讲都休息呢，比较忙不死，今天接近呢，他这边什么东北那一团，去大瓦新的空的去用的干了。东北那一年路上些中间的去谈这个的，你不打不的，做起的都可以，你他多不的，大面不去，东北那一年路下的不吧，的多用的讲了，的西吧了，的呢，你的松开的上些中间的了，看来他别的，对吧？没谁记起，跟这一边去拉弄没吧，是吧？但东北那个去些的，那的西部剧也是的，是吧？还来，那的还过瘾呢。디 지마지지 시는 다 아장지 디 또지 라분라분지 시웨이나 세낭로를 배 좋아도 마스는 시부지 카이면 있어요. 좋아 시부지 카이면 있어요. 배는 가서 내주 아니 미 지난기 미기 마시에기 내주 갈래카고 디수데 수수상단이 시용이 간다. 세나 초지 레임이 되지. 안다고 시수에지 세낭로지 레도지 당기 내주지네. 동반이 세디지 시용이 간다 할레베 초지지 디 마시웨이나 디 고안다고 지 레용 베이나야 베센디수 회식이 순시 수교에서 만다고 쉬우시 또 단다바든 가서 생데 가래 있는 지 당대 숨시 또 가래 있는 지 당대 더 진리고 더 만든 또 도지 토디요 다 도지 토니 지 큰데요 도지 토니 진리 야긴지 망부진지요 대한 파스 대한 진리고 말 나도 생는지 지 생도 진 가디도 세상 동문이 된다디 야후지 로 야후 고체의 된 말이다 고체는 진리가 있나 단단 가서 남준 싫어니고 나로라 생了直播面就炸播面的新就能新的你们两个人对他新就谁基于吧，新人你不难落了，生了直播面就炸播面的新就能新的两个人的，他生了就炸播当，就直播生了就直接就干的说的，没干也没有差个的意思，生别的哪个能行下去，你说，现在几大年前边东北那个团大的，他被干来讲这些情，别看说数当过去了，地团大的干来讲那边。今天即便看说所当的这细节的聚会呢，对，东推啊个，今天个别咱亲不及前几年，他们东北那个国的内容的讲了，那边喊着起来呢，别对么上些中间的了别，然后喊来喊出来些呢，今天对我真在乎的，今天个上些东北的送去，临近这完就年路的可能你东北的送我不上些中间的了呢，今天对我真在乎的意思，我的送多。
I see. Now, when it comes to, in particular, when it comes in particular to the subject matters, so this being a praise to dependent origination, therefore the main subject, the main topic here is dependent origination. And when the Buddha, when Lama Tsongkhapa composed this text, he was actually in a kind of retreat in a place called Yuga. He had gone to this particular place where he was in retreat, where he was engaging in extensive practices such as purifying obstacles, the practice of purifying obstacles and accumulating merit. So he practiced this really intensely. It is said that he did about 3,600,000 prostrations, 3,600,000 mandala offerings, and so forth, which shows how intense his practices were. And then in this particular situation, he composed in praise to dependent origination. Now, the Buddha himself has talked about dependent origination as being so difficult. So when we talk about dependent origination, emptiness, he himself said at some point that what I have come to realize is like a nectar that others will find so difficult to understand. So here, nectar means, Rinpoche explained that nectar means here it's a type of medicine, it's a type of ambrosia that helps us to overcome any kind of disease, in particular mental disease, any kind of obstacle. So this kind of truth the Buddha had found. And he also expressed his concern that everyone will understand these profound teachings. That was that was the very beginning as part of this verse that he first cited. It was like, no one will understand what I've got to say. Well, because it is so profound, when we talk about the suchness of dependent origination as it's sometimes expressed. So in other words, not just dependent origination, but also selflessness, which is so difficult to understand, so difficult to realize. So of all the different teachings the Buddha gave, so many deep and profound teachings that the Buddha has given, this is one of the most difficult ones. One of the most difficult teachings, dependent origination and emptiness. And it requires a lot of learning and understanding, which is reflected in the life of Lama Tsongkhapa, who did engage in a lot of study, first of all, and in intense practice. Now, in the case of him being in this particular retreat place, it's said that he basically practiced 24 hours a day. He worked so hard. He read and studied so many texts. And in that way was an incredible example for what is important to do. And he realized then emptiness himself. It is said that according to his biography, that he then realized emptiness. This very difficult concept of emptiness, he gained an understanding of that. And it is said that it's such an amazing concept. Emptiness is such an amazing concept. Once that is realized, one develops a special kind of taste of this concept. So in general, Rinpoche says it's always very satisfactory to understand something really, really difficult. So in general, that being the case, but especially when it comes to emptiness, not only is it difficult to understand, and it's definitely satisfactory to gain a realization of it, but on top of it, it does something very special to the mind. It's said that the mind becomes much calmer. It does something to our consciousness. Ordinarily, when we haven't understood emptiness, our mind is so distracted. It is high strung. Basically, we go from one object to the next. We experience a lot of problems and obstacles. However, once emptiness is realized, then that problem, then that will disappear. And so it says, for instance, also in the Heart Sutra, this is something you find explained in the Heart Sutra, that then here, because it says literally there, because there's no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear, having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. So in these words, they express exactly that the mind will be freed from all the obstacles, will be freed from all the fear, and so forth. Which is why these teachings are so special. The teachings, in particular on dependent origination and emptiness, being so profound and having such a profound effect on our mind.
다 지당 다 디스 구바 또 주의나 메나 간다 지 다니 친구 갈수 그래 롱템베 양 두단 다나신기 상하기 슝나로라야 상제 중딘데 랑니시 디오라 숨바딘데 요래 다 숨바디주 나로라 배 상제랑니 단 자오치 피그레스 요딘데 송도 다디베 롱딘 나로라 야 롱딘 나당 미다오르시 시당 배는 공부루주 롱템베 상제기 송 요래 아버투메 롱템베 상제기 송 요래 다나신기 라마 지신 담바 신다딘데 롱템베 상제기 송딘데 요로 디나로라 롱딘 디수 춘도스 다 두르지지니 야레 다헤딘데 기계지게 말다 도스 롱딘 디수데 가존 도스 제용디 간라 양 지르무치 롱 템베숑 상제지 송디수 나로라 배 상제랑니 던자오지 그래서디 디는다오지 가서 시딘데 퇴용도 저디 메시지를 양 롱딘디양 메시지 다이나 롱딘디 조 롱딘디양 메시다 좀 많이 부지래 가르스 거래 다양 고랑고랑 좀 많이 bed는 가지 요래 이나야다 지당기 지소 나로라디 주진의 장치신의 주진 조디를 장서 로마로디 장는 다다디 마로 뭐에 수라 상제지 때문에 저 가르치 버리 노스타인데 간라 더 지르무지 폐지진에 폐강진기 신도 상제기 때문에 주주로 주주 할래비 치무치 담았다 상제지 송 계시 어디도 참말 러종지 벤디상 다 루투제 둔제 생주고래 주제 게니 둔제 반주 용고래 루티진라 베 넘버 상제베 슝루 자침부 따루기 슝루 자침부 츠마르베 슝 파신기 슝 우마기 슝데 슝루 자침부 디조라베 러월러니 제시시도 다세 동위 투니 이너레 간데 러종 자침부 도스제디 디베 다운다부티 센투도 린사 송게 주시비다 괜히 치가티 소나로 배 지르무지 휴진데 할레베 친구 태요래 근데 지르무지 마페 공라 지당 왜라 슝친부 종켄데 중요 말이베스는 디데 중요래 부치고래 할레베 빈데다 친구 사제 빈데다 공가 제신 차선인 할레베다 케바 친구로 와 할레베 케바 친구래 부대야 좀 부치러 소리 다 이나야 가서 우리 강사 지기베 슝친부 용조다这些자야당 우마 파신 츠마난 가서 우리 츠마난데다 료와던 쇠다 다 용조기 러용디베 진조 예베 투니야 조예죠 진조 예베 투니 조지진 디양베 原地침부 지 니 송도 침부 주지 지니 진주 침부 진지 차니 진주기 토니 쇼 침부 전야 진제베 러 침부디 지름치 주가 나신지 중요 말다 로 모인의 수토니 중도 투제 매랑스들의 수수수 기로하다 일반적으로 지수래다 근데지 차디도 아니 지름치기 신의 오마의 되게 흉치비 진체네 디진치시네 아니 다 벽강진시도 시당 상제기 때문에 주가 지랑지 주가 지나야 배는 가서老着지기 기 안질렁이 견라 지임이네 그인 지세자담에 나오요 디순다다 넘버 상제비 때문에 자에기 상제기 때문에 준지 추도마소나 준지랑시 디 이내야 지름치 딜런 지세 ben 오마는 지세 저 파신는 지세도 지하니가 디기 휴진 제시네 아니 juba shindas la gore da gen la da lama ki juba shinda zu nang lo la ya oma kin de xie jie da pa xin kin de xie jie xi ni be shu qin zhe su ji ro di ma do ji mu chi gi gong la ga dang be nang lo la yo re da yo re ina ka su shu chi jun zhong ye me ma du be yo re di ma do be be sa je be chu ju nang lo la xiong qin bu dai de yo de na ji mu chi gi xiong qin bu zhe ge zhe be 디 휴진 태지지네 니베 파신기 디버티야 파신기 기타주 순르디 지된다 타제다부도 제야로 수바다 딘데기 휴진 태버디 세버린도 아니 가주기 나를 신이래야 니미기 나로래야 도 신베 지름지 지라 숑친구의 제야기 숑친구긴 지시 제야다 딜럽의 로종 제야기 휴진디 참말의 태지 휴진부 태 정도에 용수가 딘데 순르지래시 이름이 코랑 패베 걸다다베 참명이다 genla sunri chade bro yongzu yoganjing chuju yongzu gi genla da sunri la chabare.
I see. Now, in general, it is explained that Lama Tsongkhapa was prophesied. He was predicted. His birth was predicted by the Buddha himself. So you'll find sutric passages as well as tantric passages that came from the Buddha himself predicting the birth of Lama Tsongkhapa. Now, this is not unusual. This has happened several times that the Buddha prophesied, for instance, the coming of Nagarjuna, of Arya Asanga, and of many other great lamas. And this is not saying that one of them is greater than the other. It's just about some prophecies having been given by the Buddha, and in particular here with regard to Lama Tsongkhapa, the prediction the Buddha, the prophecy the Buddha gave is expressed in such a way that the Buddha said, there be someone who's similar to myself. So this is seen as a quite unusual kind of prophecy or prediction when it comes to the predicting the coming of Lama Tsongkhapa. And there are very special reasons for making these kind of, or for giving these predictions, for giving these prophecies. But the fact is that Lama Tsongkhapa was a really special teacher who was able to effect profound changes in Tibet, in particular in the way Tibetan Buddhism was practiced, was first studied and then eventually practiced. So basically, Buddhism changed, or the way Buddhism was dealt with in Tibet totally changed. So 700 years have passed since the coming of Lama Tsongkhapa, since the time of Lama Tsongkhapa, and still his changes have prevailed until today. Now, when we look at the text, for instance, that are studied nowadays, so we study texts on logic, studying texts on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, debating the text, studying them extensively. All this has become the foundation of Buddhist practice in Tibet, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Now, of course, before Lama Tsongkhapa, there were great panditas, there were great learned masters who lived in Tibet. So, for instance, the great master Sakyapandita, Putin Rinpoche, to just name a few. But what is so unusual about Lama Tsongkhapa was that he took these great texts, so the texts on the Middle Way, on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, on logic, on phenomenology, on discipline, and so on, these extensive texts, and he made them available to everyone and to all of us, in the sense that he composed these different commentaries on them and made them more accessible, made them more available, clarifying some difficult points and so forth. So in such a way, there were amazingly different lamas and masters of the past, all of them being different, of course. They all followed the lineage of the Buddha himself. But just as we in school, like in the situation when you go to school, there are different teachers. They may teach different similar matters or similar subject matters, but still they kind of differ in their approach. So similarly, in the past, we had these great masters, and Lama Tsongkhapa stood out in the way in which he, in particular, taught the Middle Way, logic, and the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So he very much advanced the teaching style. So the lineage of the Buddha himself, he made great advancements. So for instance, you had the Kadampa Geshes before the coming of Lama Tsongkhapa, and likewise in the Sakya tradition they had a very sophisticated system of study and so on. But still, with the coming of Lama Tsongkhapa, what happened was that, for instance, when it came to certain topics, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, giving them as an example, the study of Parchin, he started also this custom of composing a general commentary on a particular topic and then a more extensive analysis on that. So there's this style of commentary, general explanation, as well as a more extensive analysis. And this has influenced all the other traditions. So not just in Gelug tradition, but also the Sakya, Nyingma, and Kagyu tradition, you find profound changes that were caused by Lama Tsongkhapa in the way he basically changed the tradition in Tibet.
다 되는 신사래 뒤뒤라고 싫어 한 지름시 남달 망부도 다 되네 인디 되베기 주제 조디 가래 주베이나 다 땡진 대원 좀 봐세 들이다 뭐 땡종세 다 땡종세 디 넘버 상집이 따주 천시 스네레다 넘버 상집이 따주디 가래스 나오니가라 따와 땡종 따와레스 군준이 송구도 넘버 상제비 취취스 나고 오르베 다간다 넘버 상제비 숑기 된다 참만 수 뒤베이나 따와 띵종기 따와도 쥐와 채워메 원니는 뒤레스 디송구도 다디 공부루기 숑나로라디 시티라버시 된거래 된다 지버리 따와 띵종기 따와스라 윤디간가 다 넘버 상제비 따주다 전투야기 로다 치 sau슈지당 치 유시 창바 창슈지 가르요레스나 띵띵진 대원종과 세 치디다 다 띵진 대원종과 세 디기 된다디 할레비 자진부도 띵종게 림바딜라 림바 송시 능유 송규 다로 넘버 상제베 따주 가서다 능샤 간제지 시에버 있나야 띵종의 띵년 띵진 원종의 내당 디투네 시고도 변나 림바 당부디 그런 시에버 있나 디바마사스로 밀 뉴바마제스 뉴바제는 디바스고다 디바세디 밀 뉴빌레제디 디바시스 다 디바마제스 디바체나 수술은 제부 두자에 그랬어. 그래서 준제의 돈이 시도. 두자는 누구 말았어. 제부 두자된 누구 말았어 강을. 나 두자된 만되는 디 주디 디 강을 되는 용거서 디 강을 주 두자 주 디발을 되는 용거서. 주 두자질을 되는 용거. 디 디바세드 디를 되는 용. 세상 준제의 띵용기 돈이 계시도. 시용도. 난 다만 신기 지dengi 계시 시에 있나요? 띵종기 상동당 되어버이나 이로 지지를 땡이 지 용구여바다 평생 지지를 봐서 땡구여베 평생 지 파텐 추딩이 딘데기 딘중 라베 낭샤지 요런 지dengi 나오고요. 디야 이 딘중기 낭샤티나 딘루고 딘데기 낭샤티 디낭루로 딘루고 디 몬두 답지로. 그래서 이些用地方了상루베 디수도 배나 수수근 변한디 신了电灵 신긴 되는 수수된 저거 차디고 강도 수수기 마음배 되는 참마 미든 지디오 미든 미수지도 만지고 지진스 랑긴 되는 로야 그런 민도다 로야 그래요 아주 배워 진문에 배워 된다 시디강라 배워 된다 된 잠불이 내당다 배 태가 그런 저온도다 잠불이 간데 차마자 태가 돼 그래서 딘데 기상 동디강라 무슨 미게지 자오체디강라 오니 자원들이 지에버이나 또 자원 딜러 딘네 휴진 가르가르 티그리 딜러 딘 수 낭주도 많습니다 딜러 딘네 타메기 총제대 가르 용그리 또 상당토 가수 딘데기 상로 가수 시차와당 자치와당 딘데 땅토가 이나 수수기 내가 제디 디지기 아니 가수그래 야부당 총제 덴바당 뉴버 덴바당 아니 베네드 키워다 다다 수수를 렘바당 수수기 제토바다 딘데지 용구로다 그래서디 할래버지 이런 지dengi 자샤지기 돈이 시에 있는 딘종기 따수디 시부지게죠 난 넘버 3집에 따도 넘버 3집에 다 상로 동다 반대지는 거 있는 이 여루디라 딘종기 리버스라고 그러베 양면은 딘종기 따두디 시了下배 토네这些 잡아 샤다지마도 딘종기 따두지 시了下네 这些 맞아버지 무서요 rimba dambu di gidi junjeki nangshatiri yudan jebi nangshati ro dihon dyoba da dungya min dyoba se diyan junjeki toni shi gu do ta nangshengi dile dozi ya jachi dile ba dozi din sa tamba ina dungya tanje bambi tabe kubang se shi gu ra so be geje chimbu shi gu ra ro dungya tanje sebe 고 딘데기 베 내당진 용토에 요래서 그래. 디 용토에 요버딩 투사 가봐 투디어스니까 디 용토에 요래. 등에 탄지 세베 세바세 디야. 그래서 용토에 디 등에 세디 주진긴 되지요. 주도 진을 디. 등에 기타오디 당진 용모도 투디. 다든 셈을. 자와 당진 세수나니 등에 기타오 간도 거래. 등에 매버 차도 그랬어. 디양 준대기 띵중기 돈시 준대기 띵유 돈시 딜레도스 파팅서 당네 티워침비 추수디 시베이나 신라 펜베 신라 마뉴버다 두자 마제버 장的 수수둥에 탄제를 태워 딘데게제 장 디장 마인바 단도 딜레마 띵서 당유딩을 밀라 펜버 주고 그랬어 뇌마제버 장지 되는 그 말에 펜버 주고 밀라 가수 투두기 야부 제토디 상마 제고래 너뒤나 자치서도 총서 지에 있는 자치서도 그냥 상당 거였어. 저 남가다 내면 신진이 된다. 잠불이 지기 된다. 집에 된다데 안당 부샤고 그랬어. 디샤나 따다 요르다. 디샤와 있는 아주 참마베 미참마 되어도 되면 용토 그랬어. 저 디마샤나 미참마 되어도 되면 용토에 봐시 수수야 되어도 되면 용고 말했어 담아디. 그래서 이 계제디가 가르토니 시기도 쓰나 신을 펜베 저 치고 그랬어. 니지 공부를 펜베 상마도 제 상마 치고 그랬어. 그러니까 아니 개치슈디 상당고 자치슈디 상당나 아니 마랑수 자치슈디 차셰레 가준 잠불이 차셰레 마도 잠불이 가주 차셰 마로 그래서 치서디 상당나 충서디 랑싱 용거스에 디 시유한 디양 인종기 따주기도 수수 신을 신기 가진 원이 수되어래 가수를 단 난가다 내면 신지 지 된다 뒤 오了수수去的我的事情呢인종이 나샤지 시우도 세상 가르시에 보이네 인종이 따르고 돈이 파도 시작돼 진도 진짜 디지리
Yes.
원즈 용세디 딘데 계시 무치도스다
Yes. Now, having given this short introduction with regard to Lama Tsongkhapa, this should suffice for now. Anyway, there are many biographies available, so to find out more about Lama Tsongkhapa's life. Now, returning to dependent origination. The term in Tibetan means that which has arisen in dependence and in relation to other phenomena. So to express it in its fullest form, that's the meaning of dependent origination. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama has often talked about the fact that in Buddhism, if you want to summarize, if you want to sum up what Buddhism is all about, it can be summed up by way of saying, by way of talking about the view of dependent origination and the conduct of non-violence. This is actually these two aspects of Buddhism are actually described in one of Aryanagarjuna's texts. So basically, dependent origination plays such a huge part in Buddhism. In the way it's very convenient to understand, to sum up Buddhism in this twofold way, the view of dependent origination and the conduct of non-violence, in particular when it comes to dependent origination, because everything is based on dependent origination. So in the sense, we talk about three types of dependent arising. We can understand these three types once we understand what dependent origination refers to. So when it comes to the first type of dependent origination, dependence on causes and conditions, well, the point is that we all want to be happy, we want to be free from trouble, we don't want to experience problems. And so it's important to understand if we don't want that, then it's important to avoid the cause, that is harming others. Harming others is the cause of difficult or of suffering, basically, of unpleasant experiences. So if we understand that, we understand that first type of dependent origination, dependence when it comes to causes giving rise to certain results. And no one wants the result of suffering. Therefore, it said, avoid the cause of harmful actions. Do not engage in negative or harmful actions if you don't want to experience the result. So just from the point of view of a world, just from the point of view of the world, just a worldly view, everything in this world depends on other phenomena. Everything else depends, whatever exists depends on everything else or on other phenomena. So you have concepts such as interdependence, that things are mutually dependent on one another. That's also something in a worldly sense, a very important concept, a very important fact. And everyone's kind of progress, every kind of our own progress in the world, our own development in the world depends on others. So others' progress depends on us and other sentient beings, and ours does depend on others. So in that way, this is a very natural way of thinking. It's something important. It's an important idea that we affect one another. Even the Tibetan situation, the Tibetan political situation right now, if you think about it, it affects other countries, it affects other situations in this world. Whatever we do, it affects others. And the more we think about it, the deeper and more widely we think about this, the more we're able to act in a positive way, to engage in constructive activities. Our potential will increase. The results that come about through our action, or the results of our actions, will become fruitful, and our actions will be appropriate, based on the fact that we really understand dependent origination. So just from the point of view of the world, of just a worldly way of thinking, dependent arising, the concept of dependent arising is so important. Now, looking at it from the point of view of Buddhism, from a Buddhist point of view, the view of dependent origination is the foundation of everything else. Without dependent origination, nothing would be possible. Now, just talking about the presentation of cause and effect, or the concept of cause and effect. If we want happiness, well, then it depends on our actions. Suffering depends on certain actions. And if we go beyond just that, okay, so not just overcoming day-to-day kind of problems, well, in order to do so, we have to accumulate the right kind of causes, but to even take it to a deeper level, if we ask ourselves, is it possible to not just avoid certain sufferings temporarily, but is it possible to totally overcome suffering? Is it possible to attain what is called liberation? Well, the answer is yes, it absolutely is possible. Again, based on the concept of dependent origination, suffering can be totally removed. Why? Because its root cause, there's a root cause that can be identified, the root cause being grasping at an unrealistic kind of self, so grasping at a particular self, that being the root cause of suffering, and since that can be removed, suffering can be removed. So therefore, it's important to understand that that is possible, but not only are we talking here about refraining from harming other sentient beings and basically overcoming our own suffering, it's important likewise, again, based on the concept of dependent arising, to benefit others, to increase our, to change our attitude, to widen our attitude, to not just think about ourselves. It's important to also think about the benefit of other sentient beings. In fact, that is even more important. If we just think of ourselves, we won't even be able to benefit ourselves. We basically just harm ourselves. While if we adopt a view that is directed towards others, if we think about other sentient beings, if we think about the sentient beings in this world, we can truly reap a very meaningful benefit. Why is that the case? Well, because the world is not a part of us, but we are a part of this world. Therefore, we need to think of other sentient beings, think of their kindness, think of everything they've done for us, the fact that everything we've achieved in this life wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for others. So therefore, again, it's dependent origination, dependent arising in terms of our benefit comes from other sentient beings. Other sentient beings cost all the benefit. So dependent arising is therefore part of everything. It's part of this world in general, but in particular of Buddhist philosophy in a very profound way.
간들 랑기 민되버 참마 신라 뉘버 제버도 디는 거레스 신라다 레 디스트릭트 니 랑는 되버 참마 랑도 고버 참마 신라 상부 제버도 디는 용고레스 세상 신라 니지 공고레 파산 난다 지고레 상바 난다 지고스 러에 된다디 수수로 고버 참마 신신 신자了신자는作用过신的电力第一章丁用的到底谢用过说写上哪个的那边新鲜写的叔叔给电视的叔叔给 DJ 用中空的他第了怕只有马街呢水起干啥只有马街呢他开起现在永远没都是些年但这样丁用的同的谢用多刚的那丁进这个中吧是了用的刚了他对谢用的准这个丁用恰当 차셰를 딘이 차진 줘야지 차진세의 차셰 동만 딘이 차진세 무의도 샤고로 그래서 차차진기 딘딘 원종마 양 도배 다상치 도배 다상치 평생 뒤주장 평생 뒤네 샤바로 뒤네 류 다상치 평생 파서 네네 니 류 다상치 군에 파샤바 도배 다상기 딘디세기 차다 송잡고 송용고도 오다 디송디 인지 되버기 죄제 조우디 디송을 다 디송 송킹기 상제디라 아니 체주 미세 되는도 시지네 요번세요
Yes. So to summarize, whatever we don't want comes from harming other sentient beings. Whatever we do want comes from benefiting others. Therefore, others are so important in bringing about what we need. That's why in the text it talks about generating compassion, generating an altruistic attitude, generating love, and so forth. All of these need to be generated because that what we want, what we actually want, happiness and so forth, it comes from others. So all sentient beings are in a way the basis for everything we get. So this is grounded in Buddha, in dependent origination, with all sentient beings being the basis for our benefit. Therefore, it makes sense that we would want to benefit them. then returning to dependent origination. So as Rinpoche said earlier, there are these three types. There's dependence on causes and conditions. Then there's dependence on parts. That's the second type of dependent origination. So everything is made up of parts. So a part is dependent on, a whole is dependent on its parts. So a whole, something that consists of a whole, it has its parts, and the whole depends on the parts, and the parts depend on the whole. And so in that way, therefore, you have dependence on parts. Similarly, there's dependence on designation, on conceptual designation. In other words, that phenomena exist because they're merely imputed, they're conceptually imputed, that they're mutually dependent, but even more so dependent on conceptual labeling. So that's the third type of dependence, with the earlier ones being coarser than the latter ones, with the last one, dependence on labeling, being the subtlest type of dependent origination. And it's these three types of dependent origination which Lama Tsongkhapa here praises in his text by way of praising the Buddha, or explains in this text by way of praising the Buddha.
우민다에게 된 탈토바디 니치치네 아니 바로 인중기 디코나니 송어부 상제 존된데가 이번 다 제용으로 인제버로 다 지단이 신부 코랑기 우민다에게 된 탈토바디 니용디간라 디구네 상제로 모서 신부지 배모서 첼레 대버지 지용기 요래 이 지구야 디양 다 지구에서 오르베 지야디양 띵진데 원종의 띵용기 디쿠나니 시그리 타니디양 띵진데 원종의 디쿠나니 띵진데 원종의 네루스라고 오르베 디라추웨지리 오다 디쿠나랑 베 하구용디가 미세기 베 세나로라 초디 신다미다오지 내당 신다미다오지 용의 여버장 용의 여버디 아장장 그러고 지단이 침비 우미 따오디 우미기 된디 니용디간라 우미 된디 지단이 침은 드시 자단디 메시지 자요로 거기디 지단 침은 코랑 벽 강진기 신로 페이지기네 러블러니 투상 제베 거라 벽 강진기 신도 우미기 된다디 드시 자요디간라 드시 자단 메다오메다오리 배 용자긴 드시 우미 다역이 된디 시용디간라 그 뒤뒤 내당라 다용디간라 단 드시 자나면다고 친구 잡고 송스라고 그러면다고 배 용자긴 드시 자대 지디 상다 탕사버스라고 있는데 다 간다 디레 가수래 바츠기 부 바츠로 자와디 우만주가 주긴들와 디 우마시 나로라 상 탕사베 다와디 다 치생는 드시 자당디 여바야마이 매바야마이 유베 니가야마이 니가 멤버 미시시네 간다 유지야 마두버시 마제베이네 유지된도 유주 유강양 아니 초버레스 제 무슨요 말했어 유지야 마두발라 류 상류토네야 간다야 미도바 간다야 레세기 진짜기 도주 도바 미쇼바 뭐 유지양 마주바라 류장 지양 마주바라 지양 가서 간다야 미도바지 류긴 디렌 상배 군도 도바 넘버 도바 지양 마슈베 토네 로 유러 도바디 유러 즘바디 지양 메베 토네 아니 즘메데 샤바 다나 신기 가서 지양 이러 미제베 지지네 샤야디 다 돈이 공부를 다디 사무통반이 공부를 세 딘데긴 디셰 자단데 사다 나다 차리 그로 디지제 안디 마인베 자오 주남베 우미기 우마 친구기 된시 당디 자오 주남베 시수 제베 있는 공부를 주기 우마리 주기 거수 숨베 따오디 라바지리스 그 따오 메가기 따오 라바지리스 그마도 디 따오 타도레 잔스 그 말 딘데긴 디셰 자단 지양 베 슈친부요다 그 슈친부요 여러 지름지 라니기 라미 나로라에 페지 주남바지 요르던데 파신기 이제와 슈서디 가사 센티팅 가도 파신기 이제와 슈서디 디차디고 주남바 차디고 다 디마인바 양 리셰 자당 베나 단다 우마랑 주베 따오 조우치디기 차바 취지 생기기 우미 따여기 리셰 자당디 바딘 다와 잡아서 가봐 제기도 그런게 다와 잡에기 따와디 따와 세디 마레스 우마랑 주베 따와디 조우치시니 랑주베 따오 조우 생디기 그래서 딘제기 베 우미 따주는 리셰 자당 나주바 디나니 베 지양이了미지베 따와 语讲嘛，做罢了，你律讲没做罢了，甚至于的下边的刀工把它写起来，别写出的别啥的那的有别够了，一旦你这么kurang给接不进来，人家人们都写起来别用这个写出的怕，就去当不了，是吧？他顶这个短什么明白人明白的经验用的讲了，现在没找我去查用，是吧？现在上，你们去我们到。你也的来他不去吐的你要么，可有该来看不起那路重要的。你到可能让给我呀，还来比你看不的。我们到一个天大的还来我可能我超的，可有给那路来，可有些该来看不起那路了，配不印象该来看不的。现在定这个气了，你我们到一个天的你呢，该来西不去家呢？我们到一个天的你去呢，你上街了，我自己去对吧？你这不是吧？
So therefore, basically the final view when it comes to the middle way is dependent origination, and this is what the Buddha taught. Therefore, the Buddha is seen as so amazing. That's why Lama Tsongkhapa praised him here through this particular text. So now we can talk about the suchness of non-origination, or even the mode of existence of dependent origination. So there's different ways of expressing different ways of expressing dependent arising. But the point is that what we need is to gain an understanding of this, and based on this particular text, reading this text, learning or studying this particular text, it will lead to a special feeling. It may give rise to a special feeling, in particular when it comes to understanding what the Buddha has taught on that profound level. Now, when it comes to, Lama Tsongkhapa coming to Tibet or being born in Tibet, at that time, the meaning of the middle way, so the teachings on Madhyamika were already existent, and there are so many different ways to explain explain emptiness, for instance. There's so many different ways of describing the suchness or selflessness. Those being studied, they're being reflected upon and then meditated on. So there are different ways of expressing those. For instance, you had Padzab Lotsawa. Before the coming of Lama Tsongkhapa, there was the great translator, the great Lotsawa, Padzab Lotsawa, who translated Entering the Middle Way by Chandrakirti. He followed the teachings of Tangzang. So the Tangzang, that this acharya, or this master Tangzang, he described emptiness in such a way that he says phenomena do not exist, they're not non-existent, they're not both existent nor non-existence, and they're not neither. So in the end, they're basically denying existence, non-existence, that they're both and neither. It came down to saying that nothing exists at all. There's no object whatsoever. So there's nothing that can be understood. There's nothing that can be apprehended here. So there's no way to say, when we talk about suchness, it's not this, it's not that. You don't kind of focus the mind on anything. So there's nothing to be apprehended. That was one explanation that was quite prevalent in Tibet at the time, given by Tangzang. And then there was also Gyalwa Jonangpa, who, for instance, talked about the Jonangpa tradition, where there was this view that the teachings that were given by Arya Nagarjuna, the 6 collections on reasoning, or the 6 collections of reasonings, that they were just a rough presentation of emptiness. This non-affirming negation that Arya Nagarjuna talked about, that was just a rough version of emptiness, of what emptiness actually referred to. And also Lama Tsongkhapa received teachings on Parchin by a master of the Jonangpa tradition. So that was another
파신 디레샤 파신긴 데 버슈서 가사 비티슈서 조지디 디레 냐유에 공급배 세디 냐유
Kunga. Nyayang.
공급배
Nyayang.
냐유에 냐유에 다
Nyayo.
안으로
Ale, nyayo. Nyayo. Kunga.
공급배 벨
Kungape.
공급배
Kungape. So Rinpoche adds to what I just said. He's saying the commentary that Lama Tsongkhapa received by Jamyang on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras was by Nyayu Kungape. So that was, Rinpoche said, he believes that was the person who taught Lama Tsongkhapa, or whose commentary Lama Tsongkhapa received on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Anyway, there was other masters as well. So, for instance, Chogi Sengi, he was another master who, for instance, negated Chandakirti. He negated Arya Chandakirti. And again, propounded the view of there not being any object, that no object is being established, that there's nothing to be apprehended. So, basically, Lama Tsongkhapa, when he set forth the view of emptiness, he did not agree with these presentations. He did not agree with the way of presenting emptiness in the way just discussed. And so he found himself in a difficult environment, in the sense of the already prevalent teachings on emptiness at the time when Lama Tsongkhapa lived in Tibet. So he worked really hard. Not only is emptiness itself very difficult to understand and therefore very difficult to explain, but also he found himself in that very difficult environment at the time and worked really hard to set forth the view of suchness.
오다 딘디지레시 다 세상 요제디 다 딘종이 디쿠나니 세다 오다 디레시 다 디기 가서 오다 된다 라파스라 그래 야면은 딘진대원 종화 세디다 딘데 고리 요래다 딘종이 디쿠나니 세신이 라윤디간라다 그래서 딘는 종화 인상 다 동배랑신레스 동배랑신 인상 定金这文主任让先热死呢，懂得定用你不的样，平时看书的，记住即是下亚当，定金这文主任让先把大让给懂不了，你用呀，东北短大的，这东北谁的他是没个谁个嘛，让先去东北谁个了，让先去东北的是老用的讲了，他是个没个脏嘛一把，让先去么呢，马住吧，让先去马住吧。 랑추 투바 마임바레스 랑추 투바 마레스 라윈디간라 신질 땡니 용구여바지 고유에게 동的땡중 기주 기순 주야다 기주了进主야다 동的땡중 니부디 다 우메랑的된기버시 송용고다 칸들 동바기 땡중라 니바데 땡중기 동바라 니바도 니바데 동바 학고에 디 땡중 야부 학고에는 학고에서 그래 定中给让先打上这下上边边你把展了拼图呀，那定中上单位的讲让先去东北的打上这下上你把手机出来了拼图呀，我定这个动到定中平时记住计算主要的去低阳平时记住计算如果低阳的全15斤吧嘞，但第定这个的全15低阳上些兄弟的送药的现在第一姑娘呀。 这个别年了什么的准备掐的样，上些中间的对吧？现在绝对的我拍起说定这几个图呢，卡数定这着其实他卡数定这定这对比个绝对的难段的我卡数定这几我送用过的。
You see. Now, as to the subject matter of dependent origination, so being dependent arising or the suchness of dependent origination or dependent origination and suchness, whichever way you want to put it. So here when it comes to dependent origination, well, spelled out actually as being dependent on and being connected to other phenomena, or having arisen in dependence on other phenomena or in connection to other phenomena. So here we talk about dependent origination, which cannot be separated from emptiness. In other words, because phenomena are dependent origination or dependent arisen, they lack, they're empty, and because they're empty, they're dependently arisen. So these two have to be posited together. Now, of course, it's important to remember that when we say empty, we're not saying non-existence. We're saying empty of inherent existence, empty of intrinsic existence. So in other words, phenomena being empty just means that phenomena do not exist in and of themselves. They do not exist as self-sustainable phenomena. They don't exist intrinsically, inherently, without depending on any other phenomenon. So in that way, therefore, the fact that phenomena are empty of intrinsic existence is saying that they have dependently arisen, that they're dependent on other phenomena. And this needs to be understood here. We need to understand, in order to understand emptiness, we have to understand dependent arising, and vice versa. So in order to really comprehend dependent arising, we have to understand emptiness. In fact, the understanding of each of these enhance the other. So you understand, to enhance our understanding of emptiness, we have to understand dependent origination, and the other way around. Therefore, this is seen as so profound. And this is the subject matter, basically, of this text, this profound teaching on suchness and dependent origination, in particular, here being dependent origination or dependent arising being the main topic.
더 딘디되어디 더 주제기 된 사바치 주제기 치디양 할레바 좀 많이 거지 개비기다 가소리 이왕 추투해지 다디웨이 말해 지당 지름이 좀 간대질을 때가 있는다 뭐 딘디 되바다 리시님보다 내기熊都제용디 간에 배 인주지 도스 제용디 간라 예스라 그래 제용디 간라 인주지 체외이나양 고定서부지 람르지 인주지 양지 체도 가서 그래 고뭐시네 인주지短短的样乐情不休息인주지 체버치문주대지 만다오지 요버디 체취 라노메버지 용구에서 딘디 되버디 나중 디송그레 다 지르무치 딘디 되버디 제버와 공루 시주 세마세 이나다 시주 세마세 들이다가 동리기 다오 니차는 제버 다 디이告诉 딘디 되버디 제차네 지르무치 후마치 기주치 후마치 딘디 되버디 조르치 루러 생지지 칸된지니 난 루유이미 아쿠란도 딘디 되버 조르진도 순두디 간다 거디디 지르무치 슈디 간다 단도 쇼요리 인지 쇼요리 디카사 부동 쇼레 나지 로 부동 쇼레 나지 세디 벼 강진기 신도다 케베 옹부치다 할레베 케버친부다 공기 송송디 벼베 케버지기 나로를 페지 송송마 마슈디리 스기도 부동 쇼레 나지디 부디시 뒤지了制度过的是变得确定顺着确定给下了地几下路了地几下弄了地几下想了地几下为呢直接东北下为呢的下了地几只路了几都是过了间只有那个不地西对几了中途有的是的这样被打死的嘛因吧我呢常年给大家说的才在点不点的制度有的是那点这个开不清不清용다 키워치 무치르 부동 쇼레 나제디 나 공유에서 쇼라 이름이龍馬디 딘디도 쪼니 다 잠바龍간주 수녀스너지 아주龍간주에서 칼라딘데龍간주 자당 잠바도 디주龍간주 이龍간주 디간라 부동 쇼레 나제 쇼서기 치디니 딘디도 쪼르치니 강시스기 송아예 진라데말라노메 자와딘이 료원제 시지 동바 딜런 듄지는 고바치니 버스 또 저기지 아니 루디가라 부동쇼레 난제 기공년디 시디 구어리스다 시디 구디가라 시디 만장이지 디 시디 따준 고물루기 송레샤스디 땡데다 고물루기 송다 리츠 주요로 오마 리츠 주的 디수제디 제 공개단 제자로 디수 용자로 딘디 되베기 시디 최지 때문에 니도 지대 공도 주민지 딘레기지만도 저디간을 가니만도 저디 배 부동쇼레 난제 안줄 힌다 주니도 생지 오바 딩고 물루기 송배 가서 그래 지 마인진이 지레샤 선 레디 녜자는 제뉴미도 켄사디 간데 슬라이나 간데 스종이나 진 공부루기 송이 타시 수가서 송다다 주어지버 예딩이지 다 송 공부루기 송이 구도 상치 레디 간라 아니 오디니 말 디오로 루주 용로 군데스 팀에 침에 진고르 제세죠 루주기熊了点你体位因谁去我说第二天但你公布录个送什么多啊？但你对啊，你把点大号这边送因啥的事情，你公布的是的，是的蛮着急。但把点大号这边送的啊蛮着急了。但你公用的讲了，我的嘛决定出的讲，把点大约利息机，然后有个钱是些我拉面天气同为是大概一级，大概一了，可是已经年数多社区送了，是的好的我的。的确的讲了，俺那把点大约送也是都真的，你可能。被按상타를 취해지지 마 폐지지 무실로로 마 폐네 아주들 계시지 저랑게 컨텐츠에디 쇼는 가르성이들이 디 수익인 세버레스 디가 아니 아주디기 인디 되버 저기 위에서 안 디베 강소 취이자고 송가버기 아니 송레스 지니 베 가소래 라니 테모지야 고버더 제비 돈이 도시지 송도 야 슈도 나디 슈디가 베 다른 게베 이초지지 지름지는 대법에 라나메바 지지지니 다 지름지 만제 품에레 다진 제국도 지니디 다제는 지름지를 표현하기 세나 그런 강요디 만낭편만 도스 페버스 마페네 사자 가방이나 다사 말레베 창드네 이나 다 사자 지오레 인게 팅금이도 딜러 레디 강라 지름지 구마도 조사도 지름지 구마 조사바디 고르다 가딘라 지름지 구마 조사바디 고디 고디강다 그런 투 판지지니 그런 표현이 세르지 두제 난가로 떠니 근데 지름실의 표현이 시든이야 난가로 떠니 최디강라 그런 게 배파상난다다 대버 지집에 표현이 강라 세르지 두제디 가딘이가 춘진라 지름실에 우먼양일은 되네 또 추구공원든 전에 상제기 고방 고방모도 제윤디강라 가디 이거 춘진라인 쇼요로 아니 이거 춘진라 지름지 쇼서딜러 세티 주제디 바바레스다 대변도 진도 수피디강라 그리고 대변도 진데지 바바레스 뭐 진데지 송준라 진데 요래 세상디 진디 되버기 치디양지 할래버지 민다오지 위해서 치쿠랑라베 가서 우리 뉴버 메시지다 막 지당 메시지다
No sé. Now, as to the praise itself, to focus more on the praise of dependent origination itself, well, first of all, its subject matter, as already mentioned, is extremely profound, but also the words, the way it is expressed, or the way it expresses this praise is extremely eloquent, is extremely beautiful. And Lama Tsongkhapa's qualities, I mean, if you look at his writings, not just praise to dependent origination, but also his essence of eloquent speech, for instance, excuse me, that is his teachings on interpretative and provisional, on provisional and definitive teachings, or all his other texts. He's very careful in selecting every word, so every word has a particular meaning. He does not waste any words. Every word is very profound and carefully chosen. So in that way, therefore, his writings are so special, not just because of their content, but also about just in terms of the style of writing. Then, well, returning to praise to dependent origination, that was composed at when Lama Tsongkhapa was around 40 years old. So it was around that. It was around that time. Lama Tsongkhapa, according to his biography, had already realized emptiness, and therefore, after having realized emptiness, he composed this particular text. And then, after a few years, the text had become widely known, and it was recited as a prayer. And there's a story that goes that a particular person was reciting this praise of independent in praise of dependent origination. It was recited by someone who came for alms round to, at the time, a very famous master called Putuncho Namshe. So this particular master, Buddhist master, was so incredible when it came to composing texts that he was able to compose 4 volumes 4 volumes at the same time. So he would put the texts that he was working on in the 4 directions, so one in the south, one in the north, and so forth, and he would basically go around and compose these texts simultaneously, in the sense that he was going from one to the next and then compose them at the same time. So, and these were not just meaningless kind of writings, they were very profound texts. But such was his expertise when it came to composing, when it came to authoring treatises, that he was able to compose 4 at the same time. And so anyway, he overheard this particular person going on alms round. He overheard them recite Lama Tsongkhapa's In Praise to Dependent Origination. And so on first hearing it, he thought, oh, that must be a text by Nagarjuna. But he wasn't sure which one it would be. He was familiar, of course, with the collection, with the sixfold collection on reasoning of the middle way. So the collection of reasoning on the middle way. He was familiar with these 6 texts by Nagarjuna. So he thought, oh, it must be another one instead, and so he couldn't figure out which one that would be. However, when the person reciting In Praise to Dependent Origination came to verse 49, when it says, the night lily grove of Nagarjuna's treatises, Nagarjuna whom you prophesied, and so forth, when he mentioned that, he realized, oh, it can't be my Nagarjuna, since it's clear that he's quoting Nagarjuna. So he thought, oh, maybe it's by Chandakirti. But then in verse 50, it says, illuminated by the garland of white lights of Chandra's well-uttered insights, with Chandra here referring to Chandakirti, it became clear that, again, this is not by Chandakirti. This text is not composed by Chandakirti either. And so he then asked this person reciting it, well, who composed this text? It's neither by Nagarjuna nor by Chandakirti. And in response, he was told, or the person replied, well, this is by Lama Tsongkhapa. He quoted this, and as he gave this response, he said so with great respect for Lama Tsongkhapa. And upon hearing this, Pujin Cholen Namche, he was so taken. He was so he was inspired. He generated the spontaneous respect and devotion for Lama Tsongkhapa, and decided he had to go and see him. And so he went to Ganden. He went to see Lama Tsongkhapa. He prepared extensive offerings of gold to be offered to Lama Tsongkhapa. However, when he arrived, near Lhasa, he actually arrived near Lhasa, he found out that Lama Tsongkhapa had just passed away. So it was about 20 years after he had composed this particular text. Lama Tsongkhapa had just passed away. And so he was so disappointed, he was so saddened by the fact that Lama Tsongkhapa had not met him. But out of his great devotion, it said that he threw the gold in the sky. He threw it in the sky as an offering to Lama Tsongkhapa. And the story goes that because Lama Tsongkhapa had attained enlightenment with his passing away, he had attained the Dharmakaya, it is said that the gold basically settled on the place where Lama Tsongkhapa used to live in Ganden. As he had already attained enlightenment, that was seen as a symbol for that, that the gold settled exactly in that particular place in Ganden Monastery where Lama Tsongkhapa had passed away.
다 슝무시디 딘디 되바 디니 만두에라 다 딘디 되바 디 디렌도 디시 자유디 간라 된신도 고샤 자당디 민다도 녜데시 마오 로야디 자오긴디 장수긴 지바디 제 아니 개인 랑림비 딘디 되바기 지바신도 다 디니 디 나네다 개인 랑림비 지바디 니기 사제디 니지문 잡으신 예수기나 님비 사제 장만 어딘가 모르지 조디 코나 자오 코나나 된지 다 담부디 다 자가르당 표기다 남바상제베 개버주기 숑가른 제버 있는 숑디 뇌디라 최버주버세 정고로 최버주버세지 난 고기 된다디 최버주버 아니 디 샹디네 다 좀바 당자고 디네 지인세 리고熊无系 된다 티시 안주기 된다 디네라고 다 상만 하나 디요래다 다 단다디 라 좀바 당제디 미세 수도 페시요 말에 이거 말때다 디 되나 요래 다 뇌라다 최버지비 유디양 상제 중인데 딘디 되버 용족이 되번 제세 유디양 상제 중인데 이나양 딘디 되버기熊코란디 제 용디가나 디기 뇌기 통마통마딜라 뇌라 랑기 라마당 상제 중인데라 아니 가서 괴샤 것도 당니 되번 것도 당니 딜라베 정주 제 정주 것도 당于토네 아니 딘디 상제 중인데 딘디기 나샤인데 송샤 딘디던 제 트렌드인데 송샤 디베 한산인 디베베 모서 침버인 디베 이게 가서 볼때 메도 중화인 디베 라마 메버레스 딘디던 지 딘지 대원 중화된 지 덴시티 주리지만도 송지치네 된지 되어버린 제용으로 다 딘제기 베 된기 된한 제기熊无系디 마용베 뇌딜라야 랑기 라마다 상제 중인데라 정주제들 다叫시시시는 뇌를 정주제로 뇌를 정주제디 고가 침부도 고가 침부요래 정주 마셈바이나 남바 상제비 취를 추구만로 정주디 다 취구 구다 되고 이지야리 니네 낭중 가서 디스기와 스기와 기부 담번 낭지 취벌 가사 자오 간대지 좀바이네 자오디 좀비 뇌디라 랑기 아니 엔데벨 하스나 랑기다教念 수인의 딜라 뇌라 니 가서 그래 취버주버스네 괴샤 세야 정주지야 수어더야디 뭐도 당그레스 디 베션디 베는지 된나로라 미 야르주여바 있는다 부구 야르주여바 있나 부구 야르디 주구리다 주구 야르주여바 있나 주구 야르디 자와 계신부 가르치여바 있는 랭에라 파말라 계시지 뒤로 파말란데 지인시 파마기다 신도 여바 하고지 수로 파말랭엔 도스 라 또 지유 아니 파마니기 레가디 야보 용야기 자주 나로나스 지니 파말라 기제드네 지지시네 딩원도 당내 내가 지로하디 지당도 당지위 그래서 디수르시 지부 당부 수기 신진기 자월러 진부 가르 제여 있는 뇌라 랑기 계신이다 수수 취지 제시버디 라미 같은 상제 중인데기 같은 자와세다 제베 같은 시장 뇌라 랑기教念了 니 괴샤 세지니 같은 지스 진비 돈이 정주지야다 엔다나 신기 가서 그래 랑긴 되된 로야기체도 정주제야를 소다 아니 민되베 지다 민되베 강에 된데요 딜이 저베체도 정주제야를 소 디중은 당연고现在 정주 딩외라 송행도 남몽구르 민주국가야스 이 라만 잠배양 양의 샤체로 세들 나무 다 샤체로 선구루 수수 라마지 민주국가야 민주국가 세디 잠배양지 아니 미야세디 라드윙이 최수미지 민주다 강도 딜라세디 도디나 라만 잠배양 양의 샤체로 시시니 어디 라만의 취버지거디지
See. Now, having given this short introduction, then Rinpoche says, well, there are different ways to now divide the text, different ways to talk about the different or outline the text. Now, Rinpoche himself will use two commentaries. One is by Gyalwa Gyalten Gyatso, the second Dalai Lama. And more importantly, he will use a text by a master called Gendam Rinpa, who very beautifully outlined this particular text, or kind of divided it in different sections. So Rinpoche will follow the letter's explanation. Now, when it comes to outlining a text, when it comes to dividing it in different sections, usually a text starts with expressing homage, the expression like paying homage, and promising to compose this text. That's usually done. Then there's the actual text, and then you'll have the conclusion. So usually you can say that every text, basically every Buddhist text, is made of those three parts. Now here, even in the praise, you have or an homage at the very beginning. What is paid homage to is the Buddha, and the entire text basically, of course, praises the Buddha. What is not found here is a promise to compose the text. That's not always explicitly mentioned. But the point is that, yes, so here in the beginning, one pays homage to, well, usually one's Lama and the Buddha. Usually these are the two objects of homage, in the sense that one also takes refuge. One takes refuge, one expresses what's so amazing about this past and what they have accomplished and so forth. So in that way, shows gratitude as well. Here, of course, taking refuge is so important. As we know, without taking refuge, we cannot engage in Buddhist practice. So basically, taking refuge is the gate to Buddhism. And also it's seen as extremely important to appreciate the kindness of our object of refuge, to have respect, to show appreciation and gratitude. Now, to take a worldly kind of example, when we talk about a well-behaved child, well, if they set out to do anything, they usually ask their parents, kind of seeking their blessings, seeking their advice when they engage in something important. So this would be in the case of like a well-behaved child. So similarly here, a great master, when they engage in important and great things, in important activities, they depend also on their Lama. They know that everything they've achieved was achieved in dependence on the Buddha and on their personal Lama. So they express gratitude in that way and remember their kindness. So this is exactly what Lama Tsongkhapa does here too. In fact, there is a sentence of first Namo Guru Benzaya. So it starts off, and I don't have this in the text. Somehow this sentence is missing in the text that I have, but Rinpoche read it. So he's basically paying homage to Manjushri, to his Lama, to the Lama Manjushri. So this is what the text starts with.
Chimbalano mebatang, Tembalano mebaris. Gang ro Gangshi Sibe Chimbalano mebaris launigala, Dingin Joan Jongati, Chitawash in the Siva Inza, Chimbalano mebaris. Any Tembalano mebati, Gangshi Somba Isro, Gangshi Sibe Chimbalano meba, Gangshi Sombe Chimbalano mebas lago, Kasasa, Gangshi Sombe, Tembalano meba. Di Gangshi se di Gari Gang Sine Chimbalano meba chavare, Gang Temba Inza, Gang Somba Inza, Tembalano meba chavaresna, Dingin Joan Jungis, Dingin Joan, Sanje Jawasna, Sanje Jungin, that Dingin Joan Jung, Sunki Tiso, that Dingin Joan Jung, Di Sibe Tembalan Chimbalano meba, Di Sombe Tembalano meba. Shesan Tindegida, Dingin Joan Jung Sikenda, Domber Sebasun Demon Zing in the use and Dicado number Sugi Siegi Tindu Tubati, Zawatinalo Candedo, Ganshi Si, Soma Yise, Yakigu Yidila, Jidajas, Dindidi, Noro Sungudua, Jidadi page T. Samare Dila, Chedaja, Sipe Chimbalano Meva. Songpe Tembalano mevas loaning a cheddar to go, yes, or Sungdo, she's on Nigi diag out in our and Jidarisha. Numbers engine on the contest.
Kagar. Kagar, the Jeddah, and Chetala sword and the young chick in the Rayomare. That window, thin and the window. In Chikikan.
Songpe.
No, Songpe. No, say.
Chimbalano mevas.
Less. Sorry, just a sec. So here the first verse reads, "He who speaks on the basis of seeing, this makes him a knower and teacher unexcelled. I bow to you, O conqueror, you who saw dependent origination and taught it." Now here Lama Tsongkhapa describes the Buddha as knower and teacher, as an unexcelled knower and teacher. So what is it that he comes to know? Or basically, well, he teaches that which he has come to know on the basis of seeing what? Well, what he comes to see is dependent origination. So on the basis of realizing and on the basis of understanding dependent origination, he's a knower and taught that which he has come to know. Excuse me. And basically, Rinpoche explains now something that has to do with Tibetan grammar, which unfortunately doesn't come through in English. So here in Tibetan, you have a particular word here that may express the genitive, or it may express an agency. And in some texts, in some versions of this text, the last words in the first line expresses the genitive, the genitive case. However, it should express agency. But then I told Rinpoche that in English this doesn't come through. It's not clear that there's a difference in this particular case. And so, yeah, in English there's no change. It's he who speaks on the basis of seeing.
대기 된다디 디송용고도 침벌라노 메버레스 라운딩알라 침버 핀송 수바디 되용고래 랑된 또버 핀송 수바디 로 맞은 나진 가래 랑된 추구당 신된 수고 송용고여 봐 랑된 추구디 송용디간라 아니 또버 핀송 수바당 방버 핀송 수 방버 핀송 니 송용고로 나 침버 핀송 수바디 무 송용고래 침버기 나니 침벌라노 메버디 가르스나 땡진데 원종을 지다와신 우송도 씨바 땡진도 원종의 취니 동반니디 원도 제바 라틸 줄을 샤바나신 운송도 지다와신도 침버 디안 친당 디양 가르스고다 디지 동ning 원도 제슬라인디간라 베 당아주 단당아랑주 공주비 중문도 제리거든 또 공주비 준된의 통대 디주제디 베 수수기 냥순 용네 베 수수기 주의 배 타투버 순례디 언디 차디고 나라수기 통대기 뉘뉘의 위대 비 공주비 취디 나 상제 중된 대기 무송도 주 나수 공주비 취 냥순 아니 냥네 로 용네 무송기 주의도 주바 낭시 상제 중된 대기 취난지 디쿠난 네루 타투버 디베 무송도 냥네 지 다오신도 무송도 냥지지니 주의도 주디고로 디양베 지혜 강기자 마디바 생기 지마 타다 체니 시디 참미기 바자 로 데머즈메 딘징기 바자 참모도 제바 참마 다 지지니베 취니를 베 출了취팀바나시 동번니를 마 팅지지니 취주구이 고만이디오 취구 내루 타두를 마 디나마 팅지지니 다东尼让了嘛听几集你去了去下那些恰的个点我说第了念心被拖呢你工作被教我的让往的截图呀顶这恰的个其实顶这个被起码拉侬买不的起码拉侬买不的越为印象的困难的我的切被顶这个被起码在图书的有时候那个起码现在做的原因吧别的没大吧我说的起码大那些个被世界性linxin denpa年当了说吧顶这个别亲吧说看这个古语文的亲别人的汤节平松说吧第对应的个帮别人的平松说对帮助还行不对过的让点平松说对过让点平松说第平松说干啥让点平松的现在平松你给拿了让点平松第一对应过的亲不拉那面谁第一对应顶这仓嘛对应过的送不塞的，定金这玩意么送不塞完这个他数据故意送过了，数据图呢送下来嘛都送塞的数据故的定掉了，现在新店数据你不定了，新店是来干什么呢？申请新了，number 50点的短期的数据 number 你的嘛都数据故意申请的短期是那个嘛咯，50期是那个嘛咯，number 50点的，现在。送的新店数据那么你调用过的，新店50节给你数据那么你的新店平松出个调用过，现在平松出个太大，那月上节中点的了，确不具备的恰的是吧？现在江西西北七八拉诺没吧，江西松北对吧拉诺没吧，江西的开始呢，定金多种是。顶这个被亲不当，对吧？拉侬没被叫我第一，是吧？送去的定金这万种啊是，定金这万种我第一， 我送的这些西巴的线了，东北的这巴地了，你最多是一点多的，
You see.
嗯
So here, when it talks about knowing, so when Lama Tsongkhapa describes the Buddha as a knower, this basically expresses the fact that there are qualities a Buddha has that are mainly or principally for the benefit of the Buddha, him or herself, and then there are qualities that are principally for the benefit of others. Now, here we talk about qualities that are mainly for the Buddha, him or herself. We describe, for instance, the Dharmakaya, the Dharmakaya of a Buddha, which is also described as the truth body or the truth quality, the quality of the truth. In this case, it's twofold. Twofold here means that there's the realization, unexcelled or exalted realizations and exalted cessations. So basically, what benefits the Buddha directly are his or her their realizations and their cessations. And then, of course, there are those qualities that benefit others, which are, for instance, teaching, giving a teaching, or and this is usually described in the form of the Rupakaya, or the form body, the form quality, in that the Buddha manifests in a particular way. A Buddha manifests in a particular way to then benefit sentient beings. So in the case of Buddha Shakyamuni, having a Dharmakaya, having a Rupakaya. And in having these two qualities, then the Buddha realizes how phenomena actually exist. The Buddha realizes emptiness, not just all other phenomena, but the Buddha has a direct perception of the profound view of dependent origination and suchness. So he realizes suchness as if it were a fruit on his hand, basically, to put it in, to use this particular analogy of a particular fruit. So it's like it's open in his hand, so you can perceive phenomena in that particular way. And this is true for all phenomena, basically. The view of emptiness, that the Buddha realizes the way it exists, and for everything else, for all conventional truth as well. Now, when it comes to the knowledge the Buddha has, what's so unusual is also that the Buddha is absorbed into emptiness. So at the same time, his mind being totally absorbed into the view of emptiness, realizing the actual nature of all phenomena, at the same time the Buddha also realizes all other phenomena. So it's from within being absorbed into the view of emptiness that the Buddha knows everything else and engages in his extensive activities. Now, his knowledge being unexcelled, so as Rinpoche said before, so his knowledge here of dependent origination, but of course also of all other phenomena, such as impermanence, the Four Noble Truth, and so on. So therefore, the word knower basically expresses, first of all, his knowledge, his realization, which comes about through his cessation. So it expresses those two qualities that are mainly for the benefit of the Buddha himself, his exalted realizations and exalted cessations, or exalted eliminations or abandonments. Then secondly, of course, his knowledge benefits the Buddha. His knowledge benefits the Buddha personally, primarily, but it can also benefit other sentient beings. In what way? By way of the Buddha teaching it. So then the word teacher therefore expresses the fact or that he has a Rupakaya, he has a form body, through which he then gives teachings. He expresses, he teaches that which he's come to understand. Therefore the first verse basically describes the two qualities of a Buddha: the Dharmakaya, the Rupakaya, or in other words, the qualities of exalted realization, exalted cessation or abandonment that benefit the Buddha himself, and of course the quality of teaching what he has understood. So he speaks, the Buddha speaks, on the basis of what he's come to realize. He's therefore is a knower and a teacher. And what has he come to know, and what is it that he teaches? It's dependent origination. That's what the first verse expresses. It expresses that by way of praising the conqueror Buddha.
다 다리 숑무시디 지만인 구축이 다 뒤쪽도 사시디 저와 진행이나 저와나
So then the actual text starts with the second verse. That's when the actual part of the text starts. But if in the meantime you have questions, you're welcome to ask now. If you have any questions on emptiness or on anything else, you could raise your virtual hand. Anyone? No questions? On anything Rinpoche you've discussed so far, for instance? Oh yes, Venerable Wangela.
Venerable Wangel.
Distille Rinpoche. Geshe-la, could you ask Rinpoche to speak a little bit more on the various other views that were prevailing at the time that Lama Tsongkhapa was, studying? What were the other views? Yeah.
So forth, yeah. Rinpoche koyena. Dan tanda tangzan la sowa la chi da chi je Rinpoche sheshu rinda la yang chi toni ge dawa minda chi tangzan la sowa gi toni ge dawa di kola dos chi deshe gyorona.
Da danda di ka do di la jidang di si warda. Ji Rinpoche lawa la nang shimbe ka la lawa ni nang shimbe ka la tu du hue la yong zha gi da umi dawa tatoba di kande jire siye ji ni la di gang la 다 용자기 패시 많지어디 당부디 인사래 탕사베 다 다와 다 쿠란기 툴을 가르 공교에 있는 셰니만 송디강라 여바야마이 메바야마이 가야마이 스로 유 봄바다부지를 제외 있네야 봄바 자원이 니에요 말다 봄바 디르스 주주서 요마 세상 유지야 마두바리스다 제세 하나 인세당 유세당 제세당 인제기 수 주야지 위사마다 파가야마도 파가지지는 샤부에서다스 도스바 동바지지 로 파가가가가가지지니 파가차베 지라 수 주야면서 딘지안달로 주야면서지니 송구도 디순르지 다 디순르스네 디디 송구요다 세상 딘상去汤节，那我说通的个，让自己去的汤节，那通的个工作去的汤节，就这些对比去西南个，去汤节有把样嘛的，你没把样嘛的是吧？现在看样嘛的是呢，送，现在今天个我说让通的个工作去与的汤节团了记，看一不样。강도 양마주 바레스 유지야 마주발라 루이 뭐냐 수수 생기 뭐냐 디렌 디마렌 디레스지니 딘데긴 짐바 강양 지마주 버지니 유지야 마주발라 루지야 민짐바르 아니 도스 가진 짐메드 샤바 짐바 메바 샤바 일 미지버 샤바 일 미지버 취지 네바 다랑라 동반이 공부를 다디 우미타와 타투바 공수인데 지레스 예치네 송야디 패시 하나 용자 순지 차디겠어 와 용자 차디겠어 세상 다디 용자 차변 이 용자 차디디가라 디 고야부 니베이나 다 완치오지 디 동니了고야부 니베지 지로아 로 고야부 니베지 지리 세상 지레디 지다니치 뭐 코랑기 우미 숑디 수체디라 다 용자기 송야 디 디 고디야 니베 디 된다 가르스 유여버디야 침베 토니 우미 숑의 제버체디가라 아니 오 다디 라바이나 다다시 디민도 시지니 제버 타라심부 제지니 아니 타르 취탕지 로 다시 집에 치는다 강야 주주의 요 말에 디 이나양 지당 约巴的让心去约巴马的，让心去没巴的的没巴马的事情呢，约没细切巴的细节呢，年路东北人这些家当去送巴了，哎的没谁掐住，
I see. Now, in response to your questions, Venerable Mangala, so Rinpoche said, well, there were various views when it came to emptiness, but I guess as to the most prevalent one that existed at the time, for instance, when Lama Tsongkhapa was himself still studying the Dharma, was the view by Tangzang. So Tangzang, his view was the most prevalent in Tibet at the time. His view being that phenomena, so take for instance a phenomena such as a vase, such as a pot, for instance. A pot doesn't exist. It's not existent. It's not non-existence. It's not both existent and non-existence, and it's not neither existent and non-existent. So basically, there's nothing that can be said about the vase. It's like it's everything that you say about the vase it's not that. Which means there is no object that can be established here. Cannot say it is this, it cannot say it's that, so it wouldn't be this, it wouldn't be that. It's neither. So this view was basically negating everything. Emptiness here meant to negate everything. There's nothing to be established, there's nothing to be said about the vase other than it's not this, it's not that. So all that appears to us, in other words, whether it's causes and effects, whether it's conventional truth, whatever is that appears to us, it does not exist in this way, it does not exist in that way. So it's nothing. It's neither. It's not this, it's not that, and so forth. So all conventional truth are not established. Nothing can be said about them. They're non-established. Which is why when you perceive emptiness, there's no mind that perceives it as this or as that. It should not apprehend anything. In other words, there's nothing to be identified. There's nothing to be said. There's nothing to be apprehended. Nothing appears basically to the mind. It doesn't appear as this, that, or anything else. It doesn't appear as something. So that was widely accepted to be the view of emptiness. And it was said that if you understand this, you understand emptiness. But Lama Tsongkhapa, having studied this particular view, and when he composed his texts on Madhyamika, on the middle way or on emptiness, he discussed this view in some detail, and said this is not the right way to express emptiness. It's not the right way to present the ultimate view, because although all phenomena, or whatever phenomenon there is, when you analyze it, when you engage in some kind of ultimate analysis, nothing can be found. But that doesn't mean that phenomena don't exist. So we're not saying that they don't exist altogether. We say they don't exist inherently. So despite phenomena not existing inherently, we can say that they do exist. So that's the different kind of explanation Lama Tsongkhapa gave.
协商与这样嘛做吧的是，原来都是他对的，年路他都了具备是吧？他都给年路看的人都是些呢，他都给年当的看的些人都是些呢，就拿举这个是吧？年路了举这个是吧？年当他都的时候的，那就拿去蹦吧的高是越下下了，越下下，拿去高蹦吧起来啊是就是越下下的。越下下去吧，脏嘛一把，我这个有嘛的事情，这些地脏了嘛下不行呢，但都嘛，我俺做有的事情，搞事的开始是，搞事他你大事个事，都嘛忍不住了，第二呗，第恰谈起出吧第二呗，你两面的第恰些事了不是二呗，都是呢嘛，但都嘛，几个起不赢呢，那得过年路了就把事了。年路了就不强着，人，但高兴他你大师给洗涤了，第一，他你大师给洗涤定度，那储备定的人那里，恰些个定的人那里，看到洗涤恰到恰近，看这几个定呢，因不因那里，高兴被他你大师给洗，就让储不起，你高的大师，你这个让储不起，我们都打干着的了，年路了就不起手，那顶这个接不起。举这个是呗，你建筑的讲了是吧？举这个是呗，举吧呢？看你也没有印象，预计嘛做吧的时候是吧？第一印象， 见嘛住是见嘛住，你说见怎样有嘛是人是见怎样有嘛，怎么的下过来，见一了没见不起下过来是，一。建议了没结果的公古的的马工人这个马的谁的样俺是看见都是老的讲了到底不是几多的上路的上路也不去当过去是的的卡送过去的变呢南军的送给我的等等变呢俺南军恰当东立公园的恰当牛梦公园去的话牛梦把下的结果嘎也去的话哎电影上恰当的所谓牛魔地处这里看的是几度，变得平面通一路，说不记了恰出么呢？平面移动去通说呢？还给平面移动进度已经怎么来为呢？今天已经怎么低？平面是恰不的长个的意思。现在平面怎么可能怕嘎下？平面设的要嘛的是建立，如果做上面都是平面可能要不嘛的是，没不嘛的，看要嘛的事情呢？如果做上建要嘛的事情是吧？建嘛做不的事情呢？看都样子面吧？你的设早呢，来没的吧？基因吧？年路他都定的基因吧的，定了跑图书呢，平面等层面怎么的嘎图？的嘎图书呢？平面了你恰把接的嘎图个的是，现在。一了结束呢，平面一了结束呢，恰当几个意思。平面早你一了嘛，就看样蛮真不一呢，恰当嘎图的意思。第送人不多，先生，我让了顾客举生气，但一旦你进不送不一呢，第点嘛的事，是吧？
I see. Now, how does it come to that particular view? How did this view develop, saying that phenomena cannot be established as anything? Well, basically, this goes back to the what's called ultimate analysis. For instance, taking an object such as a vase or such as a pillar. Well, the phenomena, or I and you and so forth. So whatever exists, of course, in general, in terms of the worldly acceptance, they all exist. So we do say a pillar exists. The pillar in a building, for instance, is a long object. It does exist. However, when you start to engage in what's called ultimate analysis, so what makes a pillar a pillar? Where's the pillar within the pillar? So you start basically analyzing the basis the parts on the basis of which we call something a pillar. So is it the long part? Is it is it all of its parts? Is it just a particular part? Does it exist outside of them? Once we start to analyze in that way, we engage in what is called ultimate analysis. And within that state of ultimate analysis, there's nothing that can be found. Nothing is there. You can't point at anything as part. If you analyze the different parts of a pillar, saying this is exactly the pillar. And this is where this view, Tangzong's view, comes from, because there's nothing to be established from the perspective of the mind that engages in ultimate analysis. From the perspective of that mind, there's nothing there. So this is the view that was the view at the time. This is how you should think about things. That emptiness means just the elimination of everything. And of course, the purpose for realizing emptiness was to overcome the afflictions, to overcome attachment, to overcome aversion, and so forth. Now, to take the example of a boy, for instance, generating attachment or desire for a girl, well, in this case, the guy perceives this girl as being very attractive, as having these innate qualities of attraction or being attractive. So here in this case, based on the view of Tangzong, you come to the conclusion this attractiveness cannot be found. Therefore, this girl cannot be found. So that means she's neither existent nor non-existent. She's not both existent or non-existent, and she's not neither either. So in that way, therefore, there's nothing to be pointed at, which then reduces, the view was that this reduces attachment, because if there's nothing to be apprehended, nothing to be identified when it comes to this girl, there's no girl to be seen, then attachment would naturally be overcome. But Lama Tsongkhapa disagreed with that.
当然，伊了没解问题，咱们都要的是 강야 이로 미제버디 다메라 루슈요 다메 다다 다메 강라야 루카 마슈바레 마도 디 다메로 루카 쇼요 말이지 년루 타투도 루디를 다메 또 가지고 그래 다메가 통수나 강기 다메 통바이나니 다메 가서 다메 통바이나 다메 또 바이나 신이 당신은 니도 그러고 다메로 루카 쇼니 당신 가고 그러고 다다 다메 강라야 루카 마슈바이나 니 디지 말했어 가서 그래 다 단지 가도 말했어 그래 근데 다다 다음에 강에 루카 마슈바이나 디 지안메 좀 장리 다 군니 구비 수리 디 수리 차주고 그랬어 기디지 다年路他都谁的，东尼都谁的，大面通过月吧，大面多过月吧的，给的去了大面叔叔的大看公鸡吧，他的龙背忙不要的，他的龙长水要么，年路多嘛都谁的，看呀一了没结吧脏了，满一把去，年路就通过月吧，就多过月吧的，谁不嘞？送开始谁不嘞是送药嘞，怕不得干嘛那些了工人把别囊落了的龙忙不长药了，这些，但大概的。이동의 비면 통하다 통의 이동의 비면 전부 뒤장을 되네 여자 지고 없으면 지고 말스 이동의 비면은 전부 여바 장치 딜미비 여자 집에 내와 요 말스 로 쿤두 상황에 쓰기래 강양 차단 강양 미집에 쓰기래 나제 장반에 쓰기래 이원든 전부 장치 이원든 전부 장된 여자 장시 여자 전시기 디 말했어. 그메딜 차번 진식이 루 디장시 말했어. 이용도 통하다 이동어 레상부 디장만 이버지 딜레 개유 토네. 아니 이용도 통화장도 마세 아니 가수 거다. 수술럽에 셀레 개유 핀투 유디비 순지. 수미 이식이 난도 줄 하마치 다시. 디가라 로 중도 하마치 휴지. 중도 하마치 쇼스나 최근 많이 배 이제기 중도 하마치 간다 태잡에 상수지 쇼네 태잡아 뭐에다 미튼베 아니 상루 세바지 디간라 레네 아니 시니 양는 되자지 양는 콘두사야 로 어딘데레 용거마도 지당네 이원도 통화장 이원도 짐바장 되자지의 유인은 이도 명원 짐바장시 시당시고야 다나신기 이동은 강도야만 통과이나 디장시 디무 당진지고야 순데 근데 차로로 디 말했어.
Let's see. So Lama Tsongkhapa, the way he doesn't agree with it, he's saying that, well, just saying that nothing appears to the mind, that phenomena should actually exist or should be seen such that they do not at all appear to the mind, that's not what we mean here with emptiness. I mean, this is kind of going beyond not just the self, an unrealistic self, it even goes beyond selflessness. So you perceive something, okay, so to perceive it as having a self means to perceive it as inherently existent. That is okay, but we shouldn't go beyond perceiving as lacking inherent existence. So therefore we shouldn't go beyond perceiving selflessness. But this is what happens here. What happens here, based on that view, you come to the conclusion, therefore, based on that presentation, you come to the conclusion you have to go beyond selflessness itself. That doesn't have to be realized. But the focus has to be selflessness. Selflessness is what we try to achieve, because otherwise we cannot overcome the view that holds on to a self. It cannot be eliminated. Therefore, to realize the ultimate mode of existence means to realize selflessness, the lack of inherent existence. It's not done by realizing something as not being established in any way. This is also clearly expressed by Acharya Kamalashila. So there are many different quotes by this masters and other masters that support this view. Now, going back to having desire for this girl, just perceiving her attractiveness, for instance. So basically, there's desire for the attraction, the attraction or the attractiveness gives rise to desire. So if you focus on desire, on this attractiveness, just not being able to say it exists as this and exists as that doesn't mean you overcome desire. It could actually give rise to aversion instead, or even arrogance. The point here is it's not enough to say there is no attractiveness. That's not the problem. Perceiving someone as attractive or perceiving someone as unattractive doesn't mean you develop desire or anger or aversion for them. It's that exaggerated mind. So perceiving someone as inherently attractive gives rise to what is called the inappropriate attitude, or a projecting kind of exaggerated mind that now exaggerates that positive quality of attractiveness, perceiving it as inherently attractive and so forth. And based on that, then attachment arises. So just perceiving someone as attractive doesn't mean you perceive them naturally as you naturally have desire for them, or perceiving someone as unattractive, you don't automatically have aversion for them. It's all based on that exaggerated attitude, which in turn is rooted in our misapprehension of reality. Yes.
吉姆奇告诉告对对别钢琴的深度，我们大约过了这些家当面朝考虑有不的，社区的，在地里狼人침묵파동침묵이 나로라, 사제 니여봐, 가자 쳐 치워, 랑 가자 쳐 총와세시 니여봐, 다 디니기 나로로 송바 디수제디 거주주 지름시 코랑 쇼베 거라, 别钢琴深度，我们大约过了这些家当面朝有不的。 我的做的做这的的，第单位呢，个个忙起下过，但全他做的下过。
Yes. So, with regard to Lama Tsongkhapa, so when Lama Tsongkhapa taught emptiness, or of this different texts, of the different texts that express emptiness, the best explanation in this context can be found in the Lamrim Chemo, in his great exposition on, or the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, especially the part on special insight, in which he talks about the object of negation. There are two outlines. One outline is describing an object of negation that is too extensive, and one outline is describing the basis of negation, or the object of negation, that is too narrow. So in this, when you read this, it becomes clear what these particular views were at the time, the views that were prevalent in Tibet at the time of Lama Tsongkhapa, and how Lama Tsongkhapa negated them. So if you read this particular section of the Lamrim Chembo, it'll become clear. We have time for one more question. Go ahead, Taylor, and then Rinpoche will finish the session. Yeah, we'll conclude the session. Please go ahead, Taylor.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rinpoche, and also Geshe-ma for your translation. So skillful, very thank you. My question, Rinpoche, please, is you have kindly told us of some of the background of Lama Tsongkhapa. And Jai Rinpoche's background, as you said, is very simple, right? How do you understand that background? He was not recognized as a reincarnated master, just a person born of ordinary parents. How do you see that significance for his teachings? Thank you.
Ale, tanda mo kandisho de karasna tangi rumbuchi di sons tanda je rumbuchi pe tuku gi namba la mashawach ta tuku che maimbache je rumbuchi yang gi nangmi gi chane yang pembolo so waran du ta mi gyume gi namba da utene odigi gobaran gyumsen karina ke chelu khande yeme rumbuchi di college sonrana ke chelu da buchi
da di la 신앙 상송기 고바 주신 다 용그레 상구토와 다 도스테와 이나 무스다 고바 유에데와 가속이 배 통토바 망부지라 고 통토비 고바 망부지 유에 나니 배나 미주마지기 라우존체네야 딘데기 배 라우신기 우치 친구지 차유 유에바 배 가서 그래 하나 배 강쟁이 신기다 주제기 맨날 용조기다 대바슈서 유자신부지 차유바 다디 디 망부지 챙기도 배배기 시가지 디강로 챙기도 야부지 종의 창맥이 지고 쉬야지마도 디 지금에 차도 지금이야 배 미리디야 배 삼반난다 지기요 지로 수체의 데모 좀 있는 디지 디 챙기도 아니 미주마지 딘데 배 러진 차요 디양 배천 야부 쉬우지 미 망부지를 디 꾸마티로 네 야부지 왜이나 가서다 중재 야부 쉬우지 투토예요 봐 당부 주마지 뭐이네 배 지마 야부 쉬우지 차요 봐디 나서 긴드는 저수 치우세기 긴드는 저수 치고에기 구가 주신 뒤로와 미비다사이 로 미비다사 차기에서 저수 누구로 해서 디 차고 엔 다나 신기 지단이 진보구나 가서 주마지 돈도 시진에 피해디기 음 다 공도 쉬자버려 지버려 아미 불라 연대연의 가딘치를 다보면서 디 된다디 구 랑신기 차이무도 디당 딜로 소바 나 소바 쉬어 상도 뭐가 주습니다 만부 쉬고 싫어
담배디 양케 선다. 아메
아
불라 연대 메나 간데칠.
유에나
어.
아미 불라 유엔데 유에나
유나.
가딘치를 다보면서 디 되는 돈이 차버라 다디 무에네 차버라 지르무지 미주마지 가딘치 세디 지르무지 치디 가딘치 스코로
맞세. 전능 알고 추면 담배디. 아메 불라 연대 연나 간데칠 다보 메스나 디름 비시 드셔시켜.
아미 불라 유엔데 수이 가딘치와 수이체는 되게
알레 수시나 알레 수시나 디. 알레
수수 뭐 유엔데
알레 라슬라스.
얘기
고
구도
다보 요마 알레 라슬라스 알레 다보 투면 버스 케요마 라슬라스. That's it, which I should So Rinpoche explained that there are many different reasons, basically, for why this is important. More obvious ones, more less obvious ones. But to just talk about the most obvious ones here, the ones that we can directly see. Well, if an ordinary person, just an ordinary person, can do such great thing, become someone so extraordinary in the sense that, many Tibetans at the time follow, or even nowadays, follow this particular person, see this person as very precious. Well, it shows us that we can basically all do something great. We don't have to be extraordinary. And so in Tibetan society, for instance, well, if someone was already born with these extraordinary, like this background, then people had already the sense, oh, they're special. So they didn't see their special qualities. I mean, they just were basically seeing the fame and so forth based on that. They would just follow them, or they give rise to envy or other such mental states. So here the point is just being totally ordinary. Then people came to see the great qualities of that person, and he served in that way as a great example for others being ordinary. So that's why we take refuge in the Sangha, for instance. We take refuge in the Sangha because they're an example of that which can be done. We take refuge in the Sangha as an example for us. So Lama Tsongkhapa, therefore, being an ordinary person, therefore anyone can do it. And there's a saying in Tibetan which says, if a child has the child of a mother has good qualities, then the seed of the Gyuto Tantric, the head of the Gelugpa tradition, has no owner. So I had to check with Rinpoche, what does that exactly mean about the owner? But what it means is that it's not like this highest seat in the Gelugpa tradition is reserved for a special person. It's for anyone who has good quality. So in other words, it's not about a particular status and so forth. Anyone who has these qualities, it doesn't matter who they are, can become the head of the Gelug tradition. So therefore, the saying is, and I repeat it, if the child of a mother has good qualities, then the seat of the Gyuto Tantric has no owner, or a specific owner. Yeah.
That's Tuichina. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tochina.
See you next week.
We'll see you again next. Yeah.